Taylor Parker wasn't the first. The disturbing history of fetal abduction. Before Taylor Parker, when many people first learn about the Taylor Parker case, they describe it as something they had never imagined could happen because fetal abduction cases are extraordinarily rare and receive intense media attention. They can appear to be isolated events. However, a review of documented cases reveals a different story. Although uncommon, fetal abductions have occurred repeatedly across North America for nearly 4 decades, exhibiting remarkably consistent behavioral patterns despite changes in technology, investigative methods, and offender tactics. This presentation examines the documented history of fetal abduction from 1987 through 2022, comparing offender behavior, victim selection, methods of deception, investigative findings, and criminal outcomes. Rather than focusing on a single notorious case, it places Taylor Parker within a broader criminological context, demonstrating that her crime followed a pattern established long before 2020. The reality is different. While fetal abduction is extraordinarily rare, it is not new. Researchers and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children have documented more than 24 fetal abduction cases in the United States since the 1970s, along with additional attempted cases in which pregnant women survived. These crimes span nearly 4 decades and reveal strikingly consistent patterns. Again and again, investigators encounter women who fabricated pregnancies, built elaborate deceptions to convince family and friends they were expecting, targeted women in late stages of pregnancy, and carefully planned an attack with the intent of taking the unborn child. Most people have never heard of these cases because they occur infrequently and are separated by years, sometimes decades. Yet when one does happen, it captures national attention because it violates one of the most deeply held expectations that pregnancy is a time of safety and anticipation rather than predation. From Darcy Pierce in 1987 to Lisa Montgomery, Dinell Lane, Clarissa Figueroa, Amber Waterman, and Taylor Parker, these cases demonstrate the fetal abduction is not an isolated phenomenon. It is a rare but well-documented form of homicide with remarkably consistent behavioral patterns. Understanding those patterns is important, not because these crimes are common, but because recognizing them can help investigators, healthcare professionals, and the public identify warning signs, understand offender behavior, and appreciate how these tragic cases fit into broader body of criminological research rather than viewing each one as an inexplicable anomaly. I've noticed something important while reviewing these cases. Taylor Parker's case is actually one of the most heavily documented fetal abductions in history, largely because of the extensive digital evidence recovered. This project makes a compelling comparison showing how offender planning evolved from Darcy Pierce in 1987 through Jacqueline Williams in 1995 to Taylor Parker in 2020, from simple pregnancy deception to sophisticated use of social media, online messaging, fake ultrasounds, and internet research. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the victims and their families. When we study crimes like these, it's easy for the focus to shift towards the offender, the investigation, or the sensational details. In the process, the people whose lives were stolen or forever changed can become secondary. That is not my intention. This presentation is dedicated to remembering the victims, the women, the children, and the families whose lives were shattered by these acts of violence. Their stories deserve to be told with dignity, compassion, and respect. My hope is that by examining these cases, we can better understand the warning signs, identify patterns, and contribute, however modestly, to greater public awareness and future prevention. If even one life can be protected because someone recognizes a risk or takes a warning sign seriously, then these victims will not be remembered in vain. 1987, Darcy Pierce, victim Cindy Ray, 23, approximately 36 weeks pregnant. Location is Albuquerque, New Mexico, July 23rd, 1987. The offender is Darcy Kayleen Pierce. She was 20 years old, and she had fabricated a pregnancy for approximately 14 months, convincing her husband, family, friends, and coworkers that she was expecting a child. She wore maternity clothes, prepared a nursery, and scheduled what she claimed would be a labor induction on the day of the crime. On July 23, 1987, Pierce abducted Cindy Ray after Ray left a prenatal appointment at Kirtland Air Force Base Clinic. Using a toy pistol, Pierce forced Ray into her vehicle and drove her to a remote area in Manzano Mountains within the Cibola National Forest east of Albuquerque. Pierce strangled Ray with a fetal monitoring belt until she lost consciousness. She then used the ignition from Ray's Chevrolet Blazer to make an abdominal incision and remove the baby. Ray died from exsanguination, massive blood loss, after being strangled into unconsciousness and having her abdomen open while still alive. Pierce transported the infant to a hospital and falsely claimed she had given birth while traveling there. Hospital staff immediately became suspicious because Pierce showed no physical signs of recent childbirth. After initially giving several false explanations, Pierce confessed to investigators and directed police to Cindy Ray's body. The infant, Amelia, survived and was reunited with her father, Sam Ray. The sentence: she was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and child abuse. The jury found Pierce guilty but mentally ill after rejecting her insanity defense. She received a life sentence. Pierce became eligible for parole after serving the required minimum term in 2025. At her third parole hearing, Cindy Ray's family again opposed her release. So the significance of this case, um, Darcy Pierce is widely regarded as one of the first modern fetal abduction cases to receive sustained national attention. It established a behavioral pattern repeatedly observed in later fetal abductions: prolonged pregnancy deception, meticulous preparation, targeted victim selection, and an attempt to present the abducted infant as the offender's biological child. These behavioral characteristics have since been documented in numerous fetal abduction cases throughout North America. 1995, Jacqueline Annette Williams, Fidel Caffey, and Laverne Ward. The victim was Deborah Evans, 28, 9 months pregnant. This occurred in Addison, Illinois, November 16 through the 17th, 1995. The offenders are Jacqueline Annette Williams, 28, Fidel Caffey, the boyfriend, and Laverne Ward, which was the victim's, Deborah Evans' former boyfriend and the biological father of two of her other children, Jordan and Elijah. Jacqueline Williams had faked a pregnancy for months despite having undergone a tubal ligation years earlier. Approximately 1 week before the murders, Williams visited Deborah Evans' apartment and asked James Edwards, Deborah's partner, about his work schedule, which prosecutors argued demonstrated planning. On the evening of November 16, 1995, Williams, Caffey, and Ward entered Deborah Evans' apartment. Deborah Evans was shot, repeatedly stabbed, and her abdomen was opened to remove her full-term infant. Her full-term son, Elijah, was removed from her womb. Samantha Evans, 10, was murdered inside the apartment. Joshua Evans, 7, was kidnapped, taken from the apartment, and later murdered. And Jordan Evans, 2, was left alive inside the apartment. Elijah survived and was taken from the scene by the offenders. James Edwards returned home after work and discovered Deborah and Samantha dead, while Jordan wandered the apartment unharmed. Police found Joshua's body the following day in Maywood, Illinois. Officers arrested Williams and Caffey on November 17th. At the time of her arrest, Williams was holding Elijah, claiming he was her newborn son. Investigators recovered counterfeit birth certificates naming Williams as Elijah's mother. Blood evidence in the suspect's vehicle and murder weapon was later recovered from a nearby lake. The sentences: Jacqueline Williams, convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, initially sentenced to death, and the sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment without parole in 2003 after Governor George Ryan commuted all Illinois death sentences. Fidel Caffey, convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping, also initially sentenced to death. The sentence later commuted to life imprisonment without parole in 2003. And Laverne Ward, convicted separately of murder and kidnapping and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. This case is one of the most violent fetal abduction cases in U.S. history. Unlike nearly every other documented fetal abduction, the crime involved 3 offenders: the murder of 3 victims and the abduction of a full-term infant. The Illinois Supreme Court opinions document months of planning, including Williams' fabricated pregnancy, efforts to obtain a firearm, surveillance of the victim's routine, and plans to present Elijah as her own child. 2000, Michelle Zonko Biga. The victim is Teresa Andrews, 23 years old and 39 weeks pregnant. This occurred in Ravenna, Ohio, September 27, 2000. The offender, Michelle Zonko Biga, was 39 years old. She falsely claimed to be pregnant for several months, convinced her husband, family, friends, and neighbors she was expecting a baby. She prepared a nursery and purchased baby supplies in anticipation of presenting the infant as her own. Biga met Andrews in the maternity department of a Walmart, where the two discussed their pregnancies. She later contacted Andrews under the pretense of purchasing the Jeep the Andrews family had advertised for sale. Before the meeting, Biga dug a shallow grave beneath the dirt floor of her garage. When Andrews arrived at Biga's home, Biga shot Andrews from behind shortly after she entered the garage. She then performed a crude cesarean section, removed the full-term infant, and buried Andrews' body beneath the garage floor. She presented the newborn as her own child to family members and investigators until the deception unraveled. After Teresa failed to return home, her husband reported her missing. Investigators traced telephone calls between Biga and the Andrews family. Police interviewed Biga and became suspicious of inconsistencies in her account. As officers returned to question her a second time, Biga died by suicide using the same firearm believed to have been used in the murder. Officers discovered the newborn alive in the nursery inside Biga's home. DNA testing confirmed the infant was Teresa and John Andrews' son, Oscar Gavin Andrews. There was no criminal sentence was imposed because Michelle Biga died by suicide. Michelle Biga case demonstrates an extraordinary level of premeditation. Biga specifically sought out pregnant women and intentionally cultivated Teresa's trust before selecting her as a victim. Investigators determined that Bika created a false pregnancy narrative, prepared a nursery, selected a believable pretext for the meeting, and dug a grave before carrying out the attack. The case became one of the clearest examples of extensive planning that characterizes many documented fetal abduction cases. One thing that stands out in this case is the level of preparation. Bika didn't simply lure a victim, she had already prepared a nursery, created a false pregnancy narrative, and even dug a grave before Teresa Andrews arrived. Those details underscore the extensive planning involved in many documented fetal abduction cases. 2003, Effie Goodson. Victim, Carolyn Simpson, 21 years old, approximately 6 months pregnant, 25 weeks. Location was Okama, Lamar, Oklahoma, and this was December 22nd through the 26th, 2003. The offender is Effie Goodson, 37 years old. She falsely claimed to be pregnant for approximately 10 months, convinced her husband, family, and friends she was expecting a baby, received a baby shower, and had already accumulated baby supplies. Carolyn Simpson worked at the Flaco Tribal Town Gaming Center and Casino in Okama, where Goodson was a regular customer. The two women had known each other for about a month after being introduced through family members. Investigators believe Goodson lured Simpson by offering free baby clothes and a crib. Simpson was last seen leaving the casino with Goodson on December 22nd, 2003. Goodson shot Simpson in the head. She removed the fetus with a sharp instrument. Simpson's body was later discovered in a field near Lamar, Oklahoma, with her abdomen cut open. On December 23rd, Goodson arrived at a Holdenville hospital carrying a dead male fetus, claiming she had delivered a stillborn. Medical personnel determined Goodson could not have recently given birth and immediately notified law enforcement. Investigators connected Goodson to Simpson's disappearance after learning the women had left work together. A hunter discovered Simpson's body several days later. The sentence, she was initially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping and initially found incompetent to stand trial. Later, withdrew her insanity defense and pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in exchange for prosecutors not seeking the death penalty. So the significance of this case, it's unlike many fetal abduction cases involving women who were nearly full term. Carolyn Simpson was approximately 25 weeks pregnant, one of the relatively uncommon documented fetal abductions involving a second trimester pregnancy, which is approximately 25 weeks gestation. The case also illustrates another recurring pattern. Offenders often cultivate a relationship with the victim before they attack and use baby-related offers such as free clothes or a crib to gain the victim's trust. 2004, Lisa Marie Montgomery. The victim was Bobby Jo Stinnett, 23 years old, approximately 36 weeks pregnant, and this occurred in Skidmore, Missouri, December 16, 2004. Lisa Marie Montgomery was 36 years old. She was a resident of Malvern, Kansas, married with 4 children from a previous marriage, had undergone a tubal ligation years earlier, and could no longer become pregnant. Documented history of severe childhood physical, sexual, and emotional abuse that later became central to her defense during sentencing. For months, Montgomery falsely claimed she was pregnant, telling her husband, family, co-workers, and friends she was due to give birth in December 2004. She fabricated pregnancy updates and used the deception to explain her anticipated possession of a newborn. Montgomery and Bobby Jo Stinnett met through an online rat terrier breeding forum where they discussed dogs using the alias Darlene Fisher, Montgomery arranged to purchase a rat terrier puppy from Stinnett. On December 16, 2004, Montgomery drove approximately 170 miles from Melbourne, Kansas to Skidmore, Missouri. After arriving at Stinnett's residence, Montgomery attacked her with a rope, strangling her until she lost consciousness. Using a kitchen knife, Montgomery cut open Stinnett's abdomen and removed the unborn baby girl. She left Bobby Joe Stinnett to die at the scene. Montgomery transported the infant back to Kansas and attempted to pass the child off as her own biological daughter. Bobby Joe Stinnett's mother discovered her daughter's body shortly after the attack and contacted authorities. Investigators quickly focused on online communications from the Rat Terrier Breeders Forum. Emails between Stinnett and Darlene Fisher led investigators to Lisa Montgomery. Less than 24 hours after the murder, FBI agents located Montgomery at her home in Melbourne, Kansas. The infant was recovered alive and safely returned to her father. Montgomery initially claimed she had given birth at a women's clinic, but investigators quickly disproved the story through medical records and witness interviews. DNA testing confirmed the infant was Bobby Joe Stinnett's daughter. Montgomery was convicted in federal court of kidnapping resulting in death. A federal jury recommended the death penalty. Sentenced to death in 2007, numerous appeals argued Montgomery suffered from severe mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder, and brain damage resulting from years of abuse. On July 13, 2021, Montgomery was executed by lethal injection at the Federal Correction Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. She became the first woman executed by the federal government since 1953. Lisa Montgomery case marked a significant shift in offender methodology and remains one of the most extensively studied fetal abduction cases in the United States. Unlike earlier offenders who often targeted victims they knew personally or encountered through local social networks, Montgomery used an online rat terrier breeders community to identify, contact, and cultivate a relationship with Bobby Joe Stinnett. The case demonstrated how internet-based communities could be exploited to facilitate victim selection while preserving the same behavioral patterns observed in earlier fetal abduction cases: a fabricated pregnancy, extensive premeditation, selection of a late-term pregnant victim, and an attempt to present the abducted infant as the offender's own biological child. Beyond its behavioral significance, the case generated substantial legal and ethical debate concerning the impact of severe childhood trauma, mental illness, and competency in administration of capital punishment. Montgomery's execution by the federal government in 2021, the first federal execution of a woman since 1953, remains one of the most controversial federal executions in recent history. The unique characteristics about this case: first, widely publicized fetal abduction involving online victim selection. First offender in this series prosecuted federally because of the kidnapping crossed state lines. First and only offender in the timeline to be executed by the federal government, making the case a landmark in both criminal law and forensic psychology. 2005, Catherine Katie Smith. The victim was Sarah Brady, 27 years old, approximately 8 months pregnant. Scott County, Georgetown, Kentucky, February 10th, 2005. The offender is Catherine Marie Smith, 22 years old. She was a resident of Georgetown, Kentucky, had falsely claimed to be pregnant and convinced family and acquaintances she was expecting a baby, planned to obtain an infant and present the child as her own. Smith advertised free baby clothes and baby items to attract a pregnant woman. Sarah Brady responded to the advertisement and agreed to meet Smith at her residence. After Brady entered the home, Smith attacked her with a knife. Smith attempted to cut Brady's abdomen to remove her unborn baby. Despite suffering multiple stab wounds, Brady fought back. During the struggle, Brady gained control of the knife and fatally wounded Smith in self-defense. Brady escaped the residence and sought help at a nearby home. Emergency responders transported Brady to the hospital, where both she and her unborn daughter survived. Sarah Brady immediately identified Catherine Smith as her attacker. Investigators found evidence indicating the attack had been planned, including baby supplies and preparations consistent with Smith's fabricated pregnancy. Police determined Smith had falsely claimed to be pregnant for an extended period before the attack. The Scott County coroner ruled Smith's death a justifiable homicide resulting from Sarah Brady's lawful self-defense. Because Smith died during the assault, no criminal prosecution followed. Catherine Smith died at the scene after Sarah Brady defended herself during the attack. Authorities ruled Brady's actions were legally justified as self-defense. The Catherine Smith case demonstrates that fetal abduction attempts do not invariably result in the death of the mother or the infant. Sarah Brady's successful resistance interrupted the attack, making this one of the few documented fetal abduction attempts in which both mother and child survived. Although the abduction was unsuccessful, the case exhibited the same recurring behavioral characteristics observed in completed fetal abductions: a fabricated pregnancy, deliberate victim selection, deception through baby-related offers, extensive premeditation, and an intent to claim the infant as her own child. Unique characteristics. Again, this is one of the few documented fetal abduction attempts in which both the mother and the baby survived. The offender died during the attack after the victim successfully defended herself, and it demonstrates that the characteristics behavioral pattern can be present even when the fetal abduction is not complete. 2009, Julie Ann Corey. The victim was Darlene Haynes, 23 years old, approximately 8 months pregnant. This is Worcester, Massachusetts, July 23rd to 24th on 2009. The offender is Julie Ann Corey. She was 35 years old. She was a resident of Worcester, Massachusetts. The arrest location was Plymouth, New Hampshire. She fled there with the baby, falsely claimed to be pregnant, convinced family, friends, and her boyfriend she was expecting a baby, planned to present the infant as her own child. Corey was acquainted with Darlene Haynes through their social circles in Worcester. During the night of July 23rd through the 24th, 2009, Corey attacked Haynes inside her apartment. Haynes bludgeoned and strangled the victim. Corey removed the unborn baby from Haynes' womb. She left Haynes' body hidden, and Corey fled to a homeless shelter in Plymouth, New Hampshire, with the infant and claimed she had recently given birth. Haynes' body was discovered July 27, 2009. Investigators and medical examiners determined that Haynes' infant had been removed from her uterus following the homicide. Investigators quickly focused on Corey after witnesses reported she had suddenly appeared with a newborn despite no evidence she had been pregnant. Corey was arrested at a homeless shelter in Plymouth, New Hampshire. DNA testing confirmed the baby belonged to Darlene Haynes. The infant was safely reunited with her biological father. The sentence: she was convicted of first-degree murder in 2014 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The significance of this case: the Julie Corey case demonstrated that fetal abduction offenders do not always target complete strangers. Corey and Darlene Haynes were acquainted through their social circles in Worcester, illustrating that offenders may exploit existing relationships or familiarity to gain access to their victims. After the homicide, Corey fled across the straight lines with the infant and attempted to present the child as her own. 2009, Karina Roberts. The victim was Heather Megan Snively, 21 years old. She was approximately 8 months pregnant. Location was Beaverton, Oregon, Washington County. The date was June 5th, 2009. Karina Roberts was 27 years old, a resident of Beaverton, Oregon, falsely claimed to be pregnant and convinced family and friends and her boyfriend that she was expecting a baby. She maintained the deception for months and prepared to present the infant as her own. Roberts placed an online advertisement offering free baby clothes and infant supplies. Heather Snively responded to the advertisement and agreed to meet Roberts. Roberts lured Snively to her home in Beaverton, Oregon, after the two communicated through Craigslist about free baby clothes. Once inside, Roberts attacked Snively, rendering her unconscious before cutting her abdomen and removing the unborn infant. Roberts then attempted to claim the infant as her own child. The infant did not survive the attack. Police responded after receiving reports of an unresponsive infant and inconsistencies in Roberts' account. Medical personnel quickly determined Roberts had not given birth recently. Investigators discovered Heather Snively's body concealed in a crawl space beneath Roberts' home. Forensic evidence, witness statements, and medical findings established that Roberts had fabricated her pregnancy and planned the attack in advance. The investigation determined the online advertisement had been used to lure the victim. The sentence: she was convicted of first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and related offenses. The jury found Roberts guilty but mentally ill. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The significance of the Karina Roberts case further demonstrated the evolution of offender methodology through the use of online classification or classified advertisements. Rather than relying on personal acquaintances, Roberts used Craigslist to identify, contact, and lure a vulnerable pregnant victim to her home. Although the method of victim selection evolved with technology, the underlying behavioral pattern remained consistent with earlier fetal abduction cases: a fabricated pregnancy, extensive premeditation, targeted selection of a late-term pregnant woman, and an attempt to present the abducted infant as the offender's own child. So again, just the unique characteristics of this case is the online advertisement for free baby supplies used as a primary lure. Guilty but mentally ill verdict, which is similar to Darcy Pierce, and hospital staff immediately recognized the offender had not recently delivered a baby, helping unravel the deception. 2015, Dynell Lane. The victim was Michelle Wilkins, 26 years old, approximately 34 weeks pregnant. This occurred in Longmont, Colorado, March 18, 2015. The offender, Dynell Catrice Lane, was 35 years old. She was a resident of Longmont, Colorado, falsely claimed to be pregnant for several months after suffering a miscarriage, convinced family, friends, and her husband she was still expecting a baby, created fake pregnancy updates on social media, and continued purchasing baby supplies. She prepared a nursery and planned to present the infant as her own. Lane posted an online Craigslist advertisement offering free maternity clothes. Michelle Wilkins, who was approximately 30 weeks pregnant, responded to the advertisement. On March 18, 2015, Wilkins went to Lane's home to collect the clothing. Once inside, Lane's attacked Wilkins, stabbed her, and used two kitchen knives to cut open her abdomen in an attempt to remove the unborn child. Believing Wilkins was dead, Lane left her inside the residence. Wilkins regained consciousness, managed to crawl from the home, and sought help from neighbors. Lane transported the fetus to a nearby hospital, claiming she had suffered a miscarriage at home. A medical professional immediately questioned Lane's story because she showed no physical signs of recent childbirth. Medical personnel quickly determined Lane had not recently given birth and that her account was inconsistent with her physical condition. Police responded to Lane's residence, where they found Michelle Wilkins alive but suffering life-threatening injuries. Wilkins underwent emergency surgery and survived. Investigators determined Lane had fabricated her pregnancy for months and had carefully planned the attack. Digital evidence, social media posts, witness interviews, and physical evidence established extensive premeditation. Dynell was convicted in 2016 of attempted first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, assault, crime of violence, and related offenses. She was sentenced to 100 years in prison after receiving consecutive sentences on multiple convictions. The significance of the Dynell Lane case is one of the very few documented fetal abduction cases in which the victim survived a completed fetal extraction and later testified about the attack. Michelle Wilkins' first-hand account provided investigators and prosecutors with rare insight into offender behavior before, during, and after the assault. The case also highlighted the growing use of online marketplaces such as Craigslist to identify and lure pregnant victims. Digital evidence documenting Lane's prolonged pregnancy deception reinforced the recurring behavioral pattern observed across fetal abduction cases: fabricated pregnancy, extensive planning, targeted victim selection, and an intent to claim the infant as the offender's own. This case also helped establish an important legal precedent in Colorado because Lane was convicted of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, even though the baby was not legally considered a person, for homicide purposes under Colorado law at the time. The distinction received significant attention during the prosecution and is relevant. One of the very This is one of the very few completed fetal extractions in which the mother survived. Craigslist was used as the primary means of selecting and luring the victim. Michelle Wilkins' first-hand testimony provided investigators and the court with an unusually detailed account of the attack, and it resulted in one of the longest prison sentences imposed in a fetal abduction case, 100 years. 2015, Ashley Wade. Victim was Angelique Sutton, 22 years old, approximately 8 months pregnant. Location, the Bronx, New York. November 16, 2015. The offender is Ashley Wade. She was 22 years old. She was a resident of the Bronx, New York, had falsely claimed to be pregnant and convinced her boyfriend, family, and friends she was expecting a baby girl, maintained the deception through Facebook posts, ultrasound images, and other online pregnancy updates, created a baby registry, and publicly referred to herself as her boyfriend's pregnant girlfriend, planned to obtain a newborn and present the child as her own. Wade had known Angelique Sutton since childhood, and the two had recently reconnected through Facebook. Sutton was approximately 8 months pregnant with her first child and was engaged to the baby's father. On November 16, 2015, Sutton visited Wade's apartment in the Bronx. Once inside, Wade attacked Sutton with a knife. Wade stabbed Sutton multiple times before cutting open her abdomen and removing the infant. Responding officers found Sutton critically injured inside the apartment and Wade outside holding the newborn while claiming the child was her own. Emergency medical professional transported both Sutton and the infant to the hospital. Medical professional immediately determined Wade had not recently given birth. Investigators discovered evidence of Wade's prolonged fabricated pregnancy, including Facebook posts, ultrasound images, and a baby registry. DNA testing confirmed the infant was Angelique Sutton's daughter. Detectives established that Wade had planned the attack and intended to claim the newborn as her own child. The investigation relied heavily on digital evidence, witness testimony, forensic evidence, and medical findings. Investigators also documented Wade's months long fabricated pregnancy through interviews with family members, friends, and her boyfriend, all of whom believed she was expecting a child. The sentence, she was convicted in 2017 of second degree murder, first degree kidnapping, and first degree unlawful imprisonment. She was sentenced to 25 years to life. The significance of the Ashley Wade case is it illustrates the growing role of social media in sustaining long term pregnancy deception. Rather than limiting the false pregnancy to close acquaintances, Wade reinforced the deception publicly through Facebook posts, ultrasound images, and a baby registry while convincing family friends and her boyfriend that she was expecting a child. Unlike offenders who had relied on classified advertisements to locate victims, Wade selected a childhood acquaintance with whom she had recently reconnected through Facebook. Although technology changed how offenders maintained the false identities and reestablished contact with victims, the underlying behavioral pattern remained consistent with earlier fetal abduction cases: a fabricated pregnancy, extensive planning, selection of late term pregnant victim, and again an intent to present the infant as the offender's own. This case is particularly important because it shows technology serving two distinct roles. One, maintaining the false pregnancy through social media, and two, reestablishing contact with the victim through Facebook after the prior childhood connection. That makes it a useful bridge between the earlier Craigslist based cases such as the Dynell Lane and the Karina Roberts, and later cases in which social media become primary means of victim selection. The unique characteristics of this case is the victim was a childhood friend, and then the Facebook serving as the two maintaining the false pregnancy and then reestablishing contact with the victim. And then the infant survived despite the fatal attack on the mother. 2019, Clarissa Figueroa. The victim was Marlene Ochoa Lopez, 19 years old. She was approximately 38 weeks pregnant, full term. She was married to Giovanni Lopez, location Scottsdale neighborhood, Chicago, Illinois. The date was April 23rd, 2019. The offender, Clarissa Figueroa, 46 years old, a resident of Chicago, Illinois, falsely claimed to be pregnant after suffering the loss of an adult son and maintained the deception among family and acquaintances. She joined Facebook groups for expectant mothers and offered free baby clothing and infant supplies, planned to obtain a newborn and present the child as her own. She had two accomplices: Desiree Figueroa, 24, Clarissa's adult daughter who participated in the homicide and concealment, and Peter Bobak, 40 years old, Clarissa's boyfriend who assisted in concealing the homicide after the offense. Clarissa Figueroa contacted Marlene Ochoa Lopez through Facebook groups for expectant mothers after previously providing her with baby clothes. She later invited Marlene to her home in Chicago by offering additional free baby clothes and a stroller. On April 23, 2019, Marlene traveled alone to the residence. Desiree Figueroa distracted Marlene while Clarissa attacked her from behind with an electrical cord. After strangling Marlene, Clarissa used a butcher knife to cut open her abdomen and remove the unborn infant. Marlene's body was placed in a garbage container behind the residence in an effort to conceal the crime. Clarissa transported the infant to a hospital, falsely claiming she had just given birth to a baby who was not breathing. Medical personnel immediately questioned Clarissa's account because her physical condition was inconsistent with recent childbirth. DNA testing confirmed the infant was the biological child of Marlene and Giovanni Lopez. Investigators recovered Marlene's body behind the residence. Facebook communications, witness interviews, and forensic evidence and surveillance footage established that Clarissa had used social media to identify, contact, and lure the victim. The investigation further determined that Desiree Figueroa participated in the homicide and Peter Bobach assisted in concealing the evidence afterward. The infant, Giovanni Lopez, survived initially but suffered severe hypoxic brain injury and died 51 days after life support was withdrawn. The sentences: Clarissa pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, sentenced to 50 years imprisonment. Desiree Figueroa pleaded guilty, agreed to testify against her mother. She was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. And Peter Bobach, convicted of concealing a homicide, sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. The significance of the Clarissa Figueroa case demonstrates the continued evolution of fetal abduction offender methodology through the use of social media. Rather than relying on personal acquaintances or classified advertisements, Clarissa joined Facebook groups for expectant mothers, established trust by providing baby clothing, and later used additional offers of infant supplies to lure Marlene to her home. The case also illustrates how offenders may enlist family members in planning or carrying out the offense, making it one of the few documented fetal abduction homicides involving multiple active participants. Although technology transformed how victim was identified and groomed, the underlying behavioral pattern remained consistent with earlier cases: the fabricated pregnancy, deliberate victim selection, extensive planning, deception, and again an intent to claim another woman's child as the offender's own child. 2020, Taylor Renee Parker, the victim, Reagan Simmons Hancock, 21 years old, approximately 35 weeks pregnant, New Boston, Bowie County, Texas, October 9th, 2020. Taylor Renee Parker was 27 years old. She was a resident of Mount Pleasant, Titus County, Texas, maintained an elaborate fabricated pregnancy for approximately 10 months, despite never being pregnant, deceived her boyfriend, family, friends, co-workers, and members of her community into believing she was expecting a baby, created one of the most elaborate fabricated pregnancies documented in fetal abduction cases, including maternity photographs, fake ultrasound images, fake prenatal appointments, fabricated medical updates, a gender reveal celebration, and repeated claims of pregnancy loss, followed by renewed pregnancy claims. She purchased baby clothing, diapers, bottles, infant furniture, and medical supplies in preparation for presenting the infant as her own. She created and maintained and fabricated medical documentation to reinforce the deception. A mutual acquaintance recommended Parker as an affordable wedding photographer. After meeting through wedding photography arrangements, Parker developed a friendship with Reagan Simmons Hancock through Facebook Messenger and in-person visits. On October 9, 2020, Parker returned to Reagan's residence after arranging the visit during an earlier meeting the previous evening. Once inside the home, Parker attacked Reagan using strangulation and blunt force trauma. Parker then used a sharp cutting instrument to perform a crude fetal extraction, removing Reagan's unborn daughter. Parker placed the infant in her vehicle and fled the scene. Reagan Simmons Hancock died from the injuries she sustained during the attack. Parker attempted to convince others she had just given birth while transporting the infant to the hospital. Emergency medical personnel immediately questioned Parker's account because she showed no physical signs of recent childbirth. Medical personnel quickly determined Parker had not recently given birth and that her account was inconsistent with her physical condition. Family members and investigators identified numerous inconsistencies in Parker's claimed pregnancy timeline. Investigators recovered an extensive collection of digital evidence documenting months of planning, including Facebook Messenger communications between Parker and Reagan, internet searches related to pregnancy, fetal development, cesarean sections, fetal extractions in childbirth, fake ultrasound images, pregnancy photographs, fabricated medical documentation, receipts for baby supplies and medical instruments, cell phone records documenting Parker's movements, GPS location data, surveillance video placing Parker near Reagan's residence, text messages, and social media activity. Prosecutors introduced more than 1,400 digital exhibits during the trial to demonstrate the extensive planning behind the offense. DNA testing confirmed the infant was the biological daughter of Reagan Simmons Hancock and Homer Hancock. Um, the sentence, she was convicted of capital murder in October 2022. The jury unanimously found Parker guilty. During the punishment phase, prosecutors presented extensive evidence demonstrating months of premeditation, deception, and planning. On November 9th, 2022, Parker was sentenced to death. She is currently incarcerated on Texas death row while her conviction undergoes automatic appellate review through the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Parker is currently the only woman on Texas death row sentenced for a documented fetal abduction. Her conviction is subject to automatic appellate review required in Texas death penalties. The significance of the Taylor Parker case is it's one of the most comprehensively documented fetal abduction investigations in United States history. Unlike many earlier cases that relied primarily on witness testimony and physical evidence, investigators reconstructed Parker's extensive planning through a detailed digital trail that included Facebook Messenger communications, text messages, internet searches, GPS location data, surveillance, video, receipts, photographs, fabricated medical records, and cell phone evidence. More than 1,400 digital exhibits presented at the trial illustrated months of deliberate preparation, demonstrating how modern technology can both facilitate prolonged offender deception and provide compelling evidence of premeditation. The case also demonstrates the remarkable consistency of offender behavior across more than 3 decades of documented fetal abduction cases. Parker's prolonged fabricated pregnancy, careful victim selection, extensive planning, and intent to claim another woman's child closely mirrored behavioral patterns first documented in the Darcy Pierce case in 1987. Although offender tactics evolved from personal acquaintances to online marketplaces, social media, and sophisticated digital deception, the underlying behavior pattern remained strikingly consistent. One thing that makes Parker particularly significant is that her fabricated pregnancy was maintained for approximately 10 months, extending well beyond a normal human gestation. Prosecutors used this to demonstrate the extraordinary lengths she went to sustain the deception after expected due dates had passed. That level of prolonged deception is unusual even among documented fetal abduction cases. 2022 Amber Waterman. Victim was Ashley Bush, 33 years old and approximately 31 weeks pregnant. Location Maysville, Arkansas, and Pineville, Missouri. October 28th through the 31st, 2022. The offender, Amber Waterman, was 43 years old. She was a resident of Pineville, Missouri, falsely claimed to be pregnant and maintained the deception among family, friends, and acquaintances. She created and used fictitious online identities to locate, communicate with, and groom pregnant women, and planned to obtain an unborn child and present the infant as her own. Waterman contacted Ashley Bush through Facebook, posing as a woman named Lucy who claimed to have employment opportunities available. Ashley Bush, who was approximately 31 weeks pregnant, agreed to meet Lucy regarding the job opportunity. On October 28, 2022, Waterman picked Ashley up from her home in Maysville, Arkansas. Investigators determined Ashley was transported across state lines to Waterman's property near Pineville, Missouri. Waterman fatally shot Ashley Bush before performing a crude fetal extraction with a sharp cutting instrument. She attempted to convince medical personnel that she had gone into labor and delivered the infant herself. Following the homicide, Waterman burned Ashley Bush in an effort to conceal the crime and destroy evidence. Ashley Bush was reported missing after she failed to return home. Investigators reviewed Facebook messages between Ashley and the fictitious Lucy. Digital evidence linked the fake Facebook account directly to Amber Waterman. Cell phone records, surveillance footage, vehicle evidence, and witness statements documented Waterman's movements before and after the crime. Waterman transported the fetus to a Missouri hospital, claiming she had suffered a miscarriage while traveling. Medical personnel quickly determined that Waterman's physical condition was inconsistent with her claim she had recently delivered the infant, and they immediately contacted law enforcement. DNA testing confirmed the fetus belonged to Ashley Bush and her husband, Joshua Willis. Investigators recovered Ashley's burned remains on the property associated with Waterman. Digital forensic evidence established months of planning and online deception. Waterman was charged in the United States District Court for the Western District of Missouri with kidnapping resulting in death, causing the death of a child in utero. On July 30th, 2024, Waterman pleaded guilty to both federal charges. On October 15th, 2024, she was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole in federal court. The significance of the Amber Waterman case illustrates how fetal abduction offenders continue to adapt their methods while exhibiting the same core behavioral characteristics documented for nearly 4 decades. Rather than relying on personal acquaintances or advertisements for baby items, Waterman created a fictitious online identity and used a fraudulent employment opportunity to lure Ashley Bush across state lines. The interstate nature of the offense resulted in federal jurisdiction, while Facebook communications, cell phone records, surveillance footage, DNA evidence, and other digital forensic evidence enabled investigators to reconstruct the planning and execution of the crime. Although offender tactics evolved with advances in technology, the underlying behavior pattern remained remarkably consistent: a fabricated pregnancy, deliberate victim selection, extensive premeditation, and an attempt to obtain and claim another woman's unborn child as one's own. So again, the unique characteristics here were the fraudulent employment opportunity and then the interstate transportation and receiving 2 consecutive federal sentences without the possibility of parole. In looking at the key trends and recurring behavioral patterns from 1987 to 2003, personal relationships and local contacts, 2005, baby item advertisements, 2009 to 2015, Craigslist and online classified ads, 2015 to 2022, Facebook, social media, fake online identities, and digital grooming. So when we talk about these behavioral patterns, the pregnancy deception, the offender falsely claimed to be pregnant, often for months, to family, friends, partners, and coworkers. Victim targeting. Offenders deliberately sought women in later stages of pregnancy, most often during the 3rd trimester when the fetus was viable or near full term. Trust building and grooming. Contact was established through friendship, family connections, employment, online marketplace, baby related groups, or offers of free baby items, allowing the offender to gain the victim's confidence. isolation of the victim. The offender arranged meetings in private homes, remote locations, or other settings where the victim would be alone and vulnerable. Pre-planned attack. The assault was typically carefully planned, with offenders bringing weapons, restraints, cutting instruments, towels, or other supplies in advance. Forced fetal extraction. In completed fetal abduction cases, offenders attempted or succeeded in removing the unborn child through crude, non medical cesarean incision or other traumatic means. Assumption of motherhood following the attack. Offenders commonly attempted to present the infant as their own biological child to partners, relatives, friends, or medical professionals. Evidence concealment. Many offenders attempted to hide or dispose of the victim's body, clean the crime scene, fabricate alibis, or mislead investigators. Psychological motivation. The crimes were frequently driven by an obsessive desire to obtain a baby, preserve a relationship, avoid exposing a fabricated pregnancy, or fulfill a complex psychological motivations rather than for financial gain. So, although technology dramatically changed how offenders located and communicated with victims, from personal encounters to newspapers to online advertisements to Facebook groups, fake online identities, and social media, it did not fundamentally change the behavioral sequence of these crimes. Across nearly 4 decades of documented North American fetal abduction, offenders consistently engaged in prolonged pregnancy deception, carefully selected late term pregnant victims, established trust through deception, isolated the victim, carried out a planned attack, attempted to assume the infant as their own, and often concealed evidence afterwards. While the tools evolved with advances in technology, the underlying behavioral pattern remained remarkably consistent. As we've seen throughout this series, fetal abduction is one of the rarest and most disturbing forms of homicide. While the methods and motivations varied, each case reminds us that behind every headline was a real person, a real family, and a life forever changed. My hope isn't to sensationalize these tragedies, but to understand them. By studying these cases carefully, we may recognize warning signs, improve prevention, and honor the memories of those who were taken. If you found this presentation valuable, consider subscribing for future evidence based discussions on criminal justice, criminology, and true crime. If there are cases or topics you'd like me to examine, let me know in the comments. Most importantly, thank you for taking the time to remember the victims. This presentation was created for educational and informational purposes. It is based on publicly available records, law enforcement statements, news reporting, academic sources, and historical accounts available at the time of production. Despite extensive research, errors or omissions may occur. Some older cases contain conflicting records, incomplete records, or information that has changed over time as new evidence emerged. If you discover an error or have credible primary source information that adds important context, I welcome corrections. I encourage every viewer to think critically, examine multiple sources, and conduct their own research before reaching conclusions. The goal of this channel is not to tell you what to think, but to provide a foundation for informed discussion and independent analysis. Above all, this presentation is dedicated to the victims, survivors, and families whose lives were forever altered by these crimes. They deserve to be remembered with dignity, accuracy, and compassion.